told. These are the true stories to be told and believed. One is Anti-Defamation Bill, which was introduced in the parliament when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. And that was such a majority in the parliament, virtually there was no opposition. That was record numerical strength that the ruling party had in parliament. Such a mighty government, when introduced this Anti-Defamation Bill, it came in the guise of protecting the reputation of men in public life. The reputation of men in public life is to be protected from unscrupulous people who will defame them. But latently there was an attempt to curtail the freedom of press, to scare people who were speaking truth. But truth was very bitter, truth was highly embarrassing to the men in public life. So for that, they wanted to provide some remedy. They introduced this bill, and this was a bill containing very, very draconian features. I was in my LLM when this bill was debated. Okay. The bill, once there is a complaint of defamation, the bill was providing that the burden of proof will shift to the journalist to prove that his article is not defamatory. Burden of proof was shifted. So the cardinal principle of criminal jurisprudence that an accused should be presumed to be innocent was reversed through the bill. And there was a change in the right to pre-trial discovery of evidence. Prosecution was permitted to lead evidence after a defense story is over. This was another deviation from the normal jurisprudence that was tried in that bill. And courts were authorized to conduct in-camera proceedings. What is there to conduct? See, it is a case of defamation. It has taken place if it is right. Why go in camera after that? This was the bill. Press was up in arms against this bill. They successfully generated, mobilized, deployed, and shot their cannon, and ultimately such a thunderous government with thunderous majority had to drop the bill. There was no alternative but to drop the bill. This was possible. Maybe press was so alert because its own liberty was in question, or whatever reason. That was a very, very successful story. But press has stood up whenever somebody else's liberty is also in question. The second bill I am referring to is the Indian Post Office Amendment Bill 1986. Already there is some power to intercept postal articles, parcels, etc., etc. They wanted to replace with a new section, section 26, which was very, very draconian again. The language is very, very subjective, which will enable the people in power to intercept any article, any parcel, thereby invading right to privacy of the citizens of this country. And the bill came in when the judiciary was consciously evolving the privacy jurisprudence. And the bill was passed also. The bill was passed. It was sent to the assent of the president. One peculiar feature of this country, president at the fag end of his office will run into trouble with the government. Quite a number of times it has happened. President Gyani Jail Singh was the president then. For his own reasons, he did not sign the bill. He said, I will keep this here, let the next president decide. Next president was President Venkatraman. By then there was change of guard in the central government. The Congress government was voted out of power, and the government of VP Singh came in, and before coming to power they had announced, we will drop that postal bill if we come to power. And as they had promised, the new president R. Venkatraman sent the bill back to the parliament, and parliament ultimately dropped that bill. Okay, this was all because of the alertness on the part of the press again. The third is Public Interest Litigation Regulation Bill 1996. It was a private member bill wherein the public interest litigation was sought to be clipped. They said any person who wants to file a public interest litigation has to deposit 1 lakh rupees. And if he loses that, if the case is dismissed, 1 lakh will be forfeited to the government. And if it is proved that the petition is initiated mala fide, there was imprisonment. Some provisions like that. Public interest litigation has become a nuisance to people in power. Quite a number of times, that is very, very inconvenient. They wanted to clip it, but again there was a lot of comment in the press. That bill was again withdrawn. And the last one is the move to amend Right to Information Act, the controversial file notings, and all of you are witnesses to what happened. The cabinet approved that amendment, which wanted to exempt file notings. File notings are very, very beautiful papers, which are like photographs. Who officer stood for what? Who is the honest officer? Who is the unscrupulous fellow? Who wants to circumvent laws and who wants to defend laws, implement laws? It will reflect like a mirror. And they wanted to take it away from the Right to Information Charter that was cleared by the cabinet. Again, the press was up in arms, and that also was to be shelved. Ultimately, the Prime Minister's office issued a notification that they have dropped the proposal, and now the file notings are also covered by the Right to Information Act. These are some of the examples which I collected for the purpose of elucidating that press can really play a very, very constructive role, and it has a very, very important say in strengthening the democratization of lawmaking process. But it should be at the same time very, very responsible. It should have its own policy. It should not have affiliations with the political parties, etc. That's all I wanted to say. I recall the words of Justice H.R. Khanna. This is the very fascinating paragraph for me from his book, Making of India's Constitution. He wrote, "Petty minds ill go with governance of great countries. The edifice of nations and national institutions, we should remember, take long to build. Behind them is the story of sweat, blood, and tears, of untold suffering and sacrifice. Yet they can be destroyed overnight by the vanishment of principles, by the selfishness, petty-mindedness, or folly of men. If the Indian Constitution is our heritage, bequeathed to us by our founding fathers, no less are we, the people of India, the trustees and custodians of the values which pulsate within its provisions. A constitution is not a parchment of paper. It is a way of life and has to be lived up to. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and in the final analysis, its only keepers are the people. Imbecility of men, history teaches us, always invites the imprudence of power." Thank you very much.
Ramraj's lecture. Walks of life and promoting awareness of their rights and social responsibilities. By fostering the spirit of public participation in important social issues, Civic has succeeded in making both citizens and official partners in the greater cause of local urban governance. Thank you for being here today, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. Dignitaries on the dais and this enlightened audience before me. First of all, I don't know if I'm the correct person to be addressing you all because I have no legal background whatsoever. I must apologize for that inadequacy. But right now, I would like to speak to you all as a journalist and also as a civil society representative. Uh, Thank you for the correction. I am not Director of Concern for Working Children. I am Executive Trustee of Civic Bangalore. And we've had two very enlightening talks in the morning by Mr. Santosh Hegde and Mr. H.K. Patil. And Mr. H.K. Patil especially emphasized the need to bring all stakeholders uh, the importance of involving all stakeholders in society before framing of a law and of holding widespread public consultations before any law is enacted, because after all the law is meant to reflect the public opinion. I'd like to give you today a few examples of how civil society has been in the forefront of bringing about some very important laws in India. But before that, I'd just like to tell you that since the 1990s, we've had a whole reform in our policies under the rubric of the new economic policy. And a whole lot of changes have happened in our governance structures, actually bypassing even the legislature, let alone having public discussion and involving stakeholders. Even parliament and legislatures have been bypassed in the so-called framing of the new economic policy. Now, who has brought in these policies which were not even debated in the parliament? Now, they have been brought in through conditionalities imposed by international financial institutions, and they have changed the whole fabric of our society, but with very little public debate and no passage of these changes in our parliament. Now, whether a structural adjustment loan should be taken or not, it's hardly discussed. Now, we are going through the same phase once more where we are beginning to question this, where our sovereignty is being compromised by our adoption of treaties or agreements finalized by the cabinet with foreign institutions or foreign countries. Only now we have become aware of that through this Indo-US nuclear deal, that this whole agreement is not accountable to the parliament. And now we are beginning to question, how can a country enter into an agreement with a foreign country and that issue is not debated or passed through parliament? So this whole economic policy has brought in so many changes, and changes that are actually opposed to our constitutional principles even. Now, our constitution says that there should not be any concentration of wealth or the production or the assets or the productive processes. But the new economic policy has reversed the whole thing and allowed concentration of economic resources in the hands of very few monopolist organizations. Anyway, that apart, I'd like to talk about some positive things that have happened through civil society. Now, civil society was the only one which was opposing the new economic policy tooth and nail, fighting it. But there was no avenue for civil society to bring any influence in the framing of the new economic policy because it was not passed through parliament at all. But one area where civil society has shown great success, I should say, is in conscientizing the whole country to the fact that though our constitution affords us fundamental rights to food, work and shelter and education and health, these issues, there are no laws to really get citizens the benefits of these rights. You'll be amazed that there is or no law which said that there should be no hungry person in this country. Now, there was no, how to actualize the right to food. There was no law. And it was only through the activism of the People's Union for Civil Liberties in Rajasthan, a lady called Kavita Srivatsava. She looked at the paradox of 60 million tons of food grains in the Food Corporation of India and people going hungry and dying of starvation in Rajasthan, especially the tribals, the Saharias, the Musahars, and all those. And she brought this to the notice of the Supreme Court. I'm sure all of you are aware of the case that is going on in the Supreme Court called the Right to Food case. And she said it is a paradox to have so much food in the godown and to have people dying of hunger. And this case is still going on. It is completely civil society led, and it has been able to achieve what even the legislatures have not been able to achieve. It has made the Supreme Court give directives to all the states of the country, especially to the chief secretaries, saying that you are responsible if any person dies of hunger in your state. So the chief secretary is now held responsible, and it has given so many interim judgments which have enabled the midday meal scheme to come about in our country. The universal school midday meal program is a result of a Supreme Court interim judgment because of this right to food case. Now they have taken it one step forward and they are fighting for universal access to integrated child development scheme, that is the nutrition program for every child in the age group 0 to 6. As you all know, more than 50% of children in India are malnourished. We are talking so much about India shining, but this is the reality. And we are amazed that the legislature takes no note of this, horrendous situation on the ground in the country, and it is only civil society which has to take up these causes. So now Supreme Court has issued an interim directive that ICDS scheme should be universalized, and there should be a ICDS center distributing supplementary nutrition to every child 0 to 6 for every population of 400 in a habitation. There should be an Anganwadi. So these are, I think, very momentous directives that we have obtained from the Supreme Court, and it is still an ongoing case. And they have given several directives as to the functioning of the public distribution system. How the ration shop should function. How many times should a citizen be enabled to access rations through the ration shop. And it has put in place, it has brought in a revolution in the way ration shops are being conducted in this country. And it has given directives in order to stem the black marketing that is the common feature of all these ration shops. So the fundamental right to food of children and adults is being ensured through this civil society case being fought with the Supreme Court. So maybe Justice Hegde would say this is an overreach of the Supreme Court. They're actually, imposing laws or directives on the legislature. But, in a fundamental question of hunger and food, if the Supreme Court did not intervene in this case, it would have been a forgotten issue. The right to food would not have come on the national agenda at all if the Supreme Court had not done this act of overreach. So, and concomitantly, this campaign is not only about the right to food, but it's also about the right to work. Now, these fundamental issues have not been taken up by our legislatures. And the right to work, it was realized by this civil society campaign that right to food is not enough unless it comes along with the right to work. Because only when you have a right to work can you claim your right to food. So now we know that there was a big law passed, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and it is the result of this right to food and work campaign that brought about this law. And it is a great achievement that in our country, civil society was able to influence the legislature to this extent that this momentous act could be passed. Now, how did this law come into place? It was not drafted by the parliamentarians. Civil society groups involved in this Right to Food and Work campaign, they drafted the draft of the law. They brought it to the notice of citizens all over the country by having seminars, symposia, workshops, and they placed it before the MPs for consideration, lobbied for it, and finally they were able to achieve it only because when the UPA government was formed, luckily for us, a National Advisory Council was set up with civil society representation. And people like Aruna Roy and Jean Dresse, who are in the forefront of this Right to Food and Work campaign, they were made members of this National Advisory Council. It is a credit to our democracy that these civil society leaders could find a place on a decision-making body which could influence what laws are passed. And that is a pre-requirement. If all stakeholders are involved in the decision-making process and given a place in these decision-making bodies, it's only then that we can get laws that are passed in the common public interest, which meet the needs of the citizens. So it was through Aruna Roy and Jean Dresse's, at the very first meeting of the National Advisory Council, they were so well prepared that they placed this draft law on the National Rural Employment Guarantee, and Sonia Gandhi was good enough to take it up, and it was sent to the parliament for debate, and it got passed. And now you have the biggest scheme in the whole world of providing 100 days of employment to one member of every household in the rural areas initially, and now it has been expanded to cover every district in India. So I don't think our legislators have passed such a big act on their own. And it was through civil society that this happened. And now to actualize, or even before this act came before Parliament,